So today we're doing a deep dive into something really interesting. It's called Emotional Food Therapy, and it's by this author, Dave Fee.
Right.
And basically, like, we're going to be looking at, this whole concept of how your emotions and your body and the food you eat, like how it's all connected through this lens of traditional Chinese medicine.
Yeah, we're going to be mainly focusing on the author's preface and then also the first 2 chapters of the book. And these sections lay like the foundation for understanding your natural emotional tendencies,
right,
and how they're linked to these different organ systems within your body.
Yeah, and our goal here is to really pull out some of the key insights for you, the listener, about how your inherent emotional leanings, which the author even connects to the timing of your birth,
right,
can really shape your overall health.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be exploring this idea of innate emotional constitutions and how they sort of fit into this framework of the 5 elements and their related organs, all through that lens of traditional Chinese medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the things that I found super interesting is, right off the bat, the author, they're talking about how traditional Chinese medicine, it doesn't separate psychology and emotions from physical ailments.
Right.
It's all very much connected.
Yeah.
And the author even mentions that, experienced TCM practitioners, often develop a kind of sixth sense about a patient's emotional state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Almost to the point where they're calling it jokingly an occupational hazard of being a TCM practitioner.
The professional hazard, yeah.
Yeah.
You start to see it everywhere.
Totally, yeah.
It's like you can't even watch a movie anymore.
I know.
Without, diagnosing all the characters.
Totally. The author actually talks about how, after years of studying this, they can't watch a romance movie or a dramatic show the same way anymore.
Yeah.
Instead of just enjoying the story, they're analyzing the characters and their emotional motivations and what kind of underlying imbalances might be going on.
I think that kind of speaks to the bigger point here, which is the holistic view that TCM takes.
Right.
So as the author points out, it's not that a disease is purely emotional without any physical impact, or that it's purely physical without any emotional component.
Yeah.
It's all interwoven.
Right. It's all one big system. Right.
It's all connected.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then the author goes on to kind of critique a little bit modern medicine's tendency to really focus on treating illnesses once they've already appeared, often missing out on that opportunity for prevention.
Right. And they also talk about how challenging it can be to really address those in-between states of subhealth.
Right. Think about it. Persistent fatigue, vague aches and pains, things that don't quite fit into a nice, neat, Western medical diagnosis.
Right. And that's, I think that speaks to a very fundamental difference in the philosophy.
Right.
With traditional Chinese medicine, there's a real emphasis on the harmony between humans and the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of nurturing life is very central to that.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating well-being and preventing imbalances from happening in the first place, rather than just seeking cures after the fact.
Mm-hmm. And, what I thought was a really keen observation from the author is that they talk about how the speed of modern life, really, our constant impatience, can really work against the effectiveness of food therapy, which requires a much more, gentle and unhurried approach.
Right.
It's not about instant fixes, right?
No.
It's about, working with your body over time.
Exactly. And I think what's interesting there is how that connects back to this core idea, the unbreakable link between our emotions and our organs in traditional Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
So the author is really emphasizing that consistent self-care grounded in these traditional principles can significantly improve our health, especially when we're dealing with those tricky psychosomatic symptoms where it's like the mind and body are clearly influencing each other.
Yeah, totally. So, when you really boil it all down, the author is sharing that their main reason for writing this book is to offer these insights into our emotional patterns, but from a TCM perspective, and kind of act as this gentle reminder, as they say, to empower us to make these conscious choices that support our well-being.
Right. And if we consider the larger picture. I think the author is really expressing this belief that a truly fulfilling life isn't necessarily about living the longest, but it's about living in a way that minimizes regrets and allows us to experience joy, while we're here.
Absolutely. So, all right, let's jump into chapter 1, which is titled Discover Your Innate Emotional Constitution. And right away, the author introduces this fascinating concept. They call it ROLER, this trinity of matter, information, and energy. And it's fundamental to how TCM understands human physiology.
Yeah. So if you think about it, the matter part is like, your physical body.
Right.
The energy, which is key, is the vital force that kind of animates it. And then information is almost like this communication network within like the meridian system that allows everything to function in harmony. And so, if one part of that is off, the others are going to be affected.
Yeah, totally. Like, okay. And then the author talks about this idea of taste and how profoundly important taste is.
Right.
And they're describing it as, really this gift that connects us to this vibrant world through our senses.
Right.
And they even bring up this legendary figure, Asu, who famously tasted like countless herbs to understand their properties, right? Since essentially laying the foundation for Chinese medicine. I mean, what a dedication to your craft.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Right, to just go around tasting everything. But, I mean, it shows you, how crucial our senses are.
Yeah, and even in ancient times, that direct sensory experience was key to understanding health and wellness.
Yeah, totally. Okay, and then they move on to talking about the significance of our very first breath, and how that initial intake of air is essentially the beginning of our independent life, right? This fundamental source of energy, and they're even comparing it to like the potential held within stem cells. I thought that was so interesting, and I was really struck by how much respect the author has for, this ancient understanding of the body, which was achieved through, internal observation without all the technology that we have today.
Right.
It's, it's really something else.
Yeah, and building on that, they even talk about the word
okay,
which means like ancestor or originator.
Okay.
And they point out that the character itself includes which is nose.
Right.
So they're directly linking the nose to this very origin of life and the initial intake of energy through breathing.
Yeah, that's so cool. All right, so let's talk about the roles of ki and du, taste, and how they kind of move through this meridian system. The author explains that the meridians, you can kind of understand them as channels for transmitting information throughout the body. Right.
Yeah, and what's interesting is how TCM views these meridians as connecting us to both te, which is the key of the heavens, which we mainly take in through smell, via the lung meridian, and also the key of grains and food, which we absorb through taste, via the spleen meridian.
Okay.
So it's like the key of heaven through breathing is more about our overall vitality, like our connection to the environment.
Right.
And then the key of grains is the energy that we're deriving specifically from food.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's like two different but related types of kli that we're taking in.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And the author really emphasizes this, the protective role of smell and taste.
Right.
They're helping us instinctively identify foods that are good for us and also warn us against those that might be harmful. So it's like we've got this built-in guidance system.
Right.
In a way.
Yeah. It's like, if something smells really rancid, they're probably not going to eat it.
Exactly.
And if something tastes really bitter, it might be a sign that it's, poisonous or something.
Yeah, totally. And then they talk about how sometimes, our cravings for specific tastes, when we're talking about, natural whole foods, could actually be our body signaling a need for certain nutrients.
Right.
And then once those needs are met, like the cravings naturally subside.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not just about, you're, emotionally attached to this food or whatever.
Right.
It's like, no, your body might actually be needing something.
Exactly.
That's in that food.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we get into this TCM perspective on O, which is Shen, which is Hun, and O, which is Po. And the author explains that the heart spirit, it acts as this overall director.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. And the tongue, which is connected to the heart, and the nose, which is connected to the lung. They play these key roles in perceiving taste and smell. Mm-hmm. Which are so important for our emotional well-being through food. Yeah. So, I mean, it's all coming back around to this idea of like how we're taking in energy, how we're processing it through these different senses. Absolutely. And how that's all, interconnected with our emotional state. Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. What did you think about the author's distinction between regular breathing, which primarily gives us oxygen, and the more, refined ability to absorb subtle energy from the air through practices like Qigong? Right. They're kind of contrasting that with our sense of taste, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, they're saying, is more readily accessible for most people to engage with that energy of food.
Yeah, it's a bit more approachable, for the average person. Yeah. Like you don't have to, meditate for hours on end to be able to taste your food. Right. You taste it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so they talk about this idea of nourishing yang and what they're calling the frequency of qi, right? And they're explaining that things that we might think of as non-material, like smells, tastes, sounds, colors, they're actually forms of matter that contain information records.
Right. So they're not just like, these abstract things. Right. They actually have substance and carry information.
Right. And it made me think of like, when you think about like digital information, it's like, we can't see it, we can't touch it, but it's still, there's a physical reality to it. Right. Yeah. In a way.
Absolutely.
So the author uses the example of a tomato, right? Mm-hmm. And how its key and its taste basically carry a record of its whole life cycle.
Right. So like how it was grown, the environment it was in, if the soil lacked certain minerals, that information would be reflected in the tomato's color and its taste.
Yeah, totally. So it's like this, the tomato itself is this container of information.
Right. And the key takeaway here, I think, is that, everything holds both information and energy. Although the complexity of that information can vary.
Right.
Tomatoes going to have a certain level of complexity, but then you can think about a human being, much more complex information.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so then they go into this really interesting discussion about how our taste preferences can actually be indicators of imbalances within our organ systems.
Right. So it's like our body is trying to tell us something through our cravings.
Right.
It's not just a matter of, I like salty food or I like sweet food.
Right.
It could be that there's an underlying imbalance that's driving that craving.
Yeah, and they give some pretty compelling examples.
Yeah, like, for instance, if someone has a really strong craving for salty foods or fermented foods, that might suggest a weakness in the kidneys.
Okay.
If someone has a preference for fried foods or starches with kind of that burnt flavor.
Right.
That could indicate weak digestion related to the spleen. Mm-hmm. And then, a desire for spicy flavors could be linked to emotional repression, often associated with the liver.
Okay. And then they point out that if you're like craving a whole bunch of different things all at once.
Yeah, like all over the map.
Yeah, then that could, indicate more complex imbalances.
Right, more multi-layered imbalances.
Right, yeah. Okay. And they caution, that if these underlying imbalances aren't addressed, these cravings can turn into addictions.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
So, the body starts to rely on those specific tastes to try and compensate for the imbalances. And that creates this cycle of dependence.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so then let's move on to this concept of tonification, and the really important influence of temperature in TCM.
Yeah, so the author clarifies that this idea of, tonifying really refers to the intensity of energy that a food possesses.
Okay.
And what I think is really interesting here is how TCM classifies the temperature of foods into these 5 properties: cold, hot, warm, cool, and neutral.
Right.
And it's not as simple as saying, like all warm foods build you up or all cool foods reduce inflammation. The 5 tastes that are present in the food, sour, bitter, sweet, pungent, and salty.
Right.
Those also play a role in determining its overall effect.
Right.
So it's not just about, whether the food feels warm going down.
Right.
It's also about, how its properties in terms of those 5 tastes contribute to its energy building properties.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. They give the example of ginger, right? Which is considered warm and pungent.
Right.
But while it, warms the body and helps move ki, it doesn't actually tonify ki on its own.
Right.
Right.
Yes. So for food to really have that tonifying effect, generally it needs to have that sweet taste.
Okay.
That's what actually builds the energy.
Okay.
And the author explains that if you want to kind of enhance ginger's tonifying properties, you could combine it with something sweet like brown sugar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they also point out that different foods have a kind of more targeted action on specific organs.
Right.
Right.
Oh,
so, for instance, longan is often used to nourish the ki and blood of the heart. Silver ear mushroom is known for its, kind of moistening effect on the lungs.
Right.
And black fungus is really beneficial for, nourishing kidney yin and purifying the blood.
Right. Yeah.
So it's fascinating how specific these actions can be.
Yeah, it really highlights the precision of TCM food therapy. It's not just about eating healthy foods in general. It's about understanding not just the general properties, but also this very specific affinity for different organ systems.
Yeah, that's so cool. Okay, so let's delve into this idea of this information body, as the author calls it, and they're using this term kind of broadly to include things like sound and smell, which are characterized by flow and transmission.
Right. Yeah, and what I find really insightful here is this idea that even things that we don't necessarily think of as physical, like music, for instance, have a frequency that can influence the body's kind.
Right.
So the author gives this example of drum sounds, how they're very uplifting. They cause ki to move upwards and outwards, which is why they were often used in ancient warfare to kind of boost morale.
Right.
But then on the other hand, the sound of a gong, has this effect. It causes ki to move inwards.
Right. Right. Yeah, I get that. Like, that makes sense. With the drum, it's like this, really activating energy, right?
Right.
And then the gong is more, centering and grounding.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And then this idea of drawing inwards also applies to taste.
Right.
Right. So they're talking about how sour and astringent flavors, like the smoked plum that's known as have this effect on ki. So they help to contain and conserve that vital energy within the organs.
Right. And that's a key principle in TCM, understanding how different sensory inputs can kind of direct the flow of ki in the body.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's move on to talking about how we absorb keki of heaven and the ki of earth.
Right.
The author explains how the plants on earth, they kind of correspond to heaven's ki through sunlight and other, celestial influences. And leaves act like prisms. They're absorbing these different frequencies of light.
Right.
And then we as humans, we're connecting to heaven's ki through smell and through breathing, and then to earth's ki through, the food and water that we consume.
Right.
And the author emphasizes this concept of humans being in the middle, striving for this balance, this middle way, right? And I thought it was really kind of a beautiful way that they described, this idea of absorbing the energy of the light spectrum, right? They're saying that, consuming colorful fruits and vegetables is like taking in the energy of light itself.
Right. It's like, we're literally taking in the rainbow.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then they talk about, how different colors in nature can actually evoke different emotions. Right. And how the 7 basic tastes, the sour, bitter, sweet, pungent, salty, bland, and astringent, they all influence the flow of of qi and blood in the body. So it's like this whole interplay between what we're experiencing through our senses and then what's going on internally.
Right, and that highlights this really intricate relationship between our sensory experiences and our internal physiological processes, including our emotions.
Totally. Okay, so now they're making a distinction between the material body, which includes our organs, and the information body, which is primarily the meridian system.
Right.
And they're explaining that our organs, they store qi, while the meridians are the channels through which qi flows. Right.
Yeah, and what's interesting here is that when there's a stagnation or blockage of qi within those meridians, which is often referred to as E or dis, that can actually manifest as physical symptoms. Like, lumps, swelling, bloating, or inflammation. So it's almost like, like a blockage in a blood vessel.
Right.
Where it's restricting the flow of blood.
Yeah.
So, the same kind of principle applies to qi in the meridians.
Got it. And then they talk about, pulse diagnosis on the lung meridian as a way to assess the overall circulation of qi and blood. And they're highlighting the lungs' really significant role in, governing all the meridians and ruling the body's qi. So the lungs are kind of this, this major player.
Yeah, they're very central to TCM's understanding of energy and circulation.
Totally. Okay, and then they go on to say that the meridians are highly sensitive to emotional changes. Right. While emotions may not always be the primary cause of a disease, they're very often reflected in the disease process.
Right. Yeah.
And they stress that long-term patterns of specific emotions can significantly impact organic diseases. So like actual physical changes in the organs.
Right. So it's not just that, you're feeling a certain way.
Right.
It's that those emotions can actually lead to physical changes in your body.
Yeah. And to illustrate that, they give this pretty powerful example of a mother who developed breast cancer due to years of repressed resentment.
Right.
And I thought that was, really, really telling. It's like, those emotions which belong to the information body can affect the meridians and then ultimately manifest as physical illness. And it was almost like, in that case, the disease became this way for those unexpressed emotions to kind of come out.
Yeah. It's it's really an example of that mind-body connection as understood in TCM.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's transition to this concept of temperature regulation and how TCM kind of views that, right?
Right.
So the author explains that this energy body regulates our temperature through the coordinated action of the heart and the kidneys. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And they talk about how heat dissipation happens through sweating and urination.
Right.
And then heat conservation involves the contraction of the lungs and the regulation of kidney. And then they also remind us that, pungent tastes, they tend to, disperse energy.
Right.
And sour tastes, they tend to, astringe and contain energy. So again, it's like these different properties of foods and how they can, influence that flow of energy within the body.
Right.
Okay. And they emphasize that while grains and root vegetables, which have a sweet taste, they provide energy and warmth, under normal conditions, they don't cause excessive heat in the body.